Welcome back to the swamp, my friends. It's good to see you made it back for another video. Not too long ago, maybe a month or two ago, I released a Folklore compilation video. You guys seemed to really enjoy that video as it did very well. So, I thought for the second time on this channel, I would compile some of my favorite folklore and creepypasta stories that I've read into one long compilation for you guys. I know I don't really read these type of stories all that often, but when I do, I like to think that they're pretty interesting. If you have a story that you would like to share in a future video, be sure to submit it at swampdweller.net or the email you can find in the description down below. I'd love to share your story with everyone here in the swamp. If you enjoy these stories, be sure to let me know by hitting that like button and subscribing. Comment down below at the end which one was your favorite story in this video. I'd love to know. Now, let's get into these creepy folklore and creepypasta stories that'll freak you out tonight. The Garland Woods. A beautiful and still monument to what Mother Nature can accomplish if left unchecked. It's one of those places where just merely being there has the potential to inspire greatness in you. During the day, as the god rays comb through the densely packed trees, you'll find a magnitude of artists and great thinkers alike soaking up the inspiration. Inspiration is why I made my journey into the Garland Woods. But what I wanted to find there was an idea for a truly great horror story. As the sun fades past the horizon and the vibrant greens turn muddy, you'll notice the crowd dispersing. Plastered around the woods are signs that warn visitors not to stay after the sun has left. I thought this was silly. It was the same cliché rule that was applied to every graveyard and abandoned home. The woods were beautiful, and so in that sense it felt like a magical place, but I never believed magic to be real. All the signs posted around didn't state that there would be any legal ramifications for staying after dark, so I gathered what I needed and waited. Instead of soaking in the inspiration that the light of the day was offering, I people-watched. I watched as an artist sat on the large extensions of an ancient tree and sketched away. Poets stood like statues in the paths of light that switched around the trees, like their ideas were solar-powered. Garland was largely untouched by man-made machines. The only unnatural part of the park was the parking lot, but even that was just compacted dirt. Legends, as they were, posed that the forest was protected by magic that halted crews from working after the sun had gone down. Stories of workers being assaulted and equipment being tampered with ran rampant in nearby towns. As I watched people carrying on, watched the hikers, artists, and the occasional businessman, the sun started to retreat. The woods were dense and it took me a while to find anything I would consider a clearing. As I was running out of light, however, I found a small patch of dirt surrounded by a circle of rocks that would fit my supplies just fine. The light diminished, and I could hear a marathon of retreating footsteps. I thought someone would stop and bother me, but they all carried on, like the forest itself was ushering them out. After a few moments had passed, the world around me became muted, and the forest took on a life outside of human interaction, like it had been wearing a mask all day, and was free to finally slip it off. The trees were cast into shadows, and the ground became a plush dark. Initially, the rumors were hard to pry from my thoughts. I wondered what manner of beast or psycho would infiltrate my campsite. In such a still and intimate environment, I think the woods were able to feel my worry and responded with a new light. From the dark plush, I watched a wave of small scattered dots of light breathe into existence. The army-sized collection of fireflies began lifting up from the grass and populating the air. A few even drifted closer to me, and the fire I had begun with whatever already broken branches I could find. I was sure to pour water around the fire just to make sure that it wouldn't spread. I might not have believed in magic, but I had no intention of burning it down either. The night was a cold one, but with the tent overhead and the pulses of heat from the fire, I was able to get pretty comfortable. And so I pulled out my notebook. The tight-lipped calls of the indigenous animals accompanied scratches of charcoal dragging across the paper. Every time I looked up to observe the dance of the fireflies, I would notice less of them had stuck around. I must have completely lost track of time. Whatever the other artists felt during the day, I was feeling it all the same in the dark. My mind raced with formations of monsters and inescapable situations. Creative deaths and meaningful escapes plagued every crevice of my mind as the pencil whittled closer to its eraser. My first touch of uncertainty came when I took a break to take a few bites of an energy bar I had brought with me. Looking out, where there was once a stadium's worth of fireflies, there was only a handful, and they were all in the distance. It looked like the bugs were trying to hide behind the trees, and as I twisted my head it became clear. I thought it was just a product of the horde dispersing with the trees. A sort of unnerving optical illusion was created. Even as I got back to writing, I couldn't help but shift my gaze from the paper back to the woods. The lights were unchanging. They continued to hang in the same spot and were in a unified formation, almost creating a ring around me. Over time, the ideas that were in my head, the horrors I myself had imagined, started to feel like they were breathing down my neck. The subtle notion of my isolation from another human soul started to invade my thoughts. What were once ideas of eldritch gods became themes of loneliness in the unending darkness. I decided I had enough ideas written down when I noticed that I was fighting to keep my hand still as it moved across the paper. Uncertain anxiety had invaded my situation with the dying of my fire. I was ready to get to sleep and let the morning come. Closing the notebook, I stood up and prepared to douse the fire. But the lights, they were much closer. I was so focused on what was inside my head that for a few moments, I completely disregarded the woods. When the flock of fireflies lifted from the ground, every time I took my eyes off them and then returned to look at them, I assumed it was the same light. I couldn't have measured how much time had passed between glances, and I never heard anything like the rustling of animals, but still my assumption about the lights, I was wrong. If it wasn't for the diminishing flames that emitted a soft orange glow, I would have assumed the fireflies had just returned. But the figures the glow was cast onto were no bugs. All around me were stout and plump dark bodies. Their only defining feature was the bright yellow lantern-like eyes held in place by bulbous heads. My previous sense of anxiety was heightened as I watched small creatures walking closer to me. When they were close enough, I could see the parts of their bodies sported a protrusion of what looked like branches. Their bodies were so varied and lacking any form that it looked as though they had been formed of the forest floor and given life. I was completely surrounded by them, with no path to escape when their advance finally halted. Looking down, I noticed, what little light was left, that they had all stopped just outside the stone circle. Not a single one of the firefly children made an attempt to cross the stones. They all stood there and looked towards me. Then a low humming noise came from all sides. The children started to undulate in a noise like flies next to your ear was produced. The noise was obnoxious, but I figured that as long as I stayed in the circle, they wouldn't be able to get to me. I thought of the legends. The tales I had heard about how they had found a crew of lumberjacks, dismembered and pinned to trees. How anyone who was reported to stay in the forest after dark went missing or was found dead the next morning. I thought of the stories I had crafted in my head that night of all the terrible ways a person could perish. I worried I would discover much worse ways to die firsthand. Then, there was a hiss. A sharp and new noise that sounded like fat burning on the stove came from inside the circle. I looked down at the fire and saw a thin shadow reaching into the circle towards my fire, and stopping when it reached the brighter portion, where it produced the hiss. It retched from the fire, or maybe it was just the light. The fire, though, was fading, The Firefly children couldn't pass through the rocks, so I was worried the shadow was something else entirely. My suspicions were confirmed with the death of the fire. I faintly watched several shadows slip past the rocks. My only defense had been completely penetrated, and I was without an option of retaliation. The shadows ignored the fire and headed directly towards me. One of the shadows brushed against a rogue twig and pushed it aside. The tendrils reaching into my circle were moving physical objects, which meant they were able to touch me. I pictured them grabbing my ankles and dragging me into the dirt. Then, the spikes of darkness halted once more, and I heard the same hissing noise as before. The tendrils were bathed in bright yellow light. Not wanting to take my eyes off the tendril, but needing to see the source, I shifted my gaze. To the right of one of the Firefly children's eyes were glowing much brighter and casting a beam onto the ground. Like a spotlight, the beam followed the tendrils and chased them out of the circle. It was with this bright light I was able to notice that the darkness that invaded my campsite was also all around me, much darker than the woods where I could see the formations of darkness swirling up nearby trees and covering the ground. Like the entirety of the dark was reaching out for me, but every time it got close, one of the children would cast a light and push it back. Helpless, I watched as the children created a light show to keep the darkness from reaching me. Miniature solar flares shooing away the bleak. Even as the light of my fire was completely snuffed out, they continued their watch, and it became clear, if it wasn't for the children, I would have been dead where I stood. Something about them, like a quiet whisper, was comforting to me. I had done my best to respect the woods when I arrived, and I think maybe it saved my life. Hours passed and my feet began aching like I was standing on needles. As I thought I would pass out, a beam of light washed over me. A soft and natural light started to cover the soil and started reaching up the trees. I watched the rays from the sun pressure the darkness that was reaching towards me. It retreated with a clearly irritated hiss, much louder than the others. With the vanishing of the darkness, so did the children begin to fade, seemingly all at once. The crack of light swallowed the forest, and where the children once stood, there was a small array of fireflies dancing in the light. They swirled in the air for a moment before returning to the grass around me, vanishing completely. I stood and reflected on the night. I don't know if I believe what I saw was magic. I collected my thoughts and my supplies. I wasn't in a rush or anything, and I wanted to stay, but something told me I had gotten all I needed. My notebook was stuffed to the brim with ideas, and I had been handed what might be the best one yet. Leaving the stone circle felt heavy, like I was stepping out into an ocean, but the feeling leveled out as I made my way out of the woods. Already several people were passing by me, looking for their daily dose of magic. But magic is a trick. What's in those woods was there far before the time of humans. It's primordial. Magic is a blink, and you'll miss it in a moment. A brief and wonderful period of time where anything is possible. I think that it's finally safe enough for me to tell this story. I've spent the last week in a mansion that was left to rot by some rich millionaire somewhere who has more money than I'll ever have. Their name wasn't important to me at the time, but I won't forget it now. The Wolf family name will forever remain a part of my memory, along with the trauma and horrors that I faced while squatting in their mansion. I've always had the mindset that the ultra-rich just bought houses to flaunt their wealth and never actually used them. And I thought that was the case with this mansion. Boy, could I not have been more wrong. For the first time, while homeless, I was truly terrified to be in a house. I think that once I'm finished fully telling this story, it'll make more sense why someone like me would say that. It's the peak of winter in January, as my time of writing this. I was staying in a house just outside of Detroit when I was chased out by the cops. These people have no care for other humans and only care to enforce the laws that suit them. Seeing as how they wouldn't let me stay in that home, I decided to look around Detroit for a safer place to live. After walking a few miles in the cold, I managed to come across a house that seemed too good of a deal. It was on a single lot facing an empty road that leads off of another neighborhood, and it had its own cul-de-sac. It was a massive house with a street and a driveway all to itself. I found it kind of weird at first for a house like that to be alone, especially cut off from the main street, especially when all of the other houses around it were so massive and expensive looking. Once I got closer to it though, things started to make a little more sense. The house appeared to have been built a long time ago, having probably been built before the rest of the neighborhood, and the owner probably wanted to have his own spot away from the rest of the neighborhood. Greedy bastard. Who goes out of their way to make a separate road for yourself and your big house? Who wouldn't want someone to be there in case you needed some help? It's questions like this that ran through my head as I came up to the front entrance to the house. It was closed off with a massive gate that leads out to the estate, with a row of trees lining each side of the road leading to the mansion. There was a thick fence connected to stone pillars that gated in the entrance to the mansion with the family name of Wolf imprinted above the main gate. But a part of the fence had the bars bent just large enough to allow me to squeeze into it. I decided to enter through it and pass through the bars into the estate. Seeing as how it was later in the evening, the mansion cast a deep shadow over the estate. The empty branches of the trees stretched out like webs, hoping that the long and scraggly lines the shadows made in the snow and dirt would capture something that the soul of the estate would enjoy devouring. I made my way towards the mansion, making sure to hide in between the trees as I made my approach to it. The community I was in wasn't a gated community, but I didn't want to bring any unwanted attention to myself. As I made my way up to the mansion, there seemed to be no signs of life anywhere. Even though it was in the dead of winter, I expected something to be around. Some sound like distant cars honking or random animals moving in the distance. There was nothing, no sound, no voices, not even other people coming into or leaving their house. It almost seemed like everything vanished around me, as far as noise is concerned. All of the lights were dark, and this mansion was no different. The closer I got to it, the more disturbed I felt at the lack of sound. The atmosphere about this house was different in every way that I could really think from a normal house, but it wasn't enough to deter me from the house and risk freezing to death in the cold. The mansion was a large 3-story house with what looked like several rooms and a large entryway. There was a set of double doors at the front that blocked my way from walking inside. I was almost certain that the doors would be locked, but something in my gut told me to try them anyway. To my surprise, they were unlocked and opened up to allow me in. The foyer was massive and led to several different rooms. What was strange about it was that there was a lone TV leading off right next to the staircase that leads upwards to the rest of the house. It appeared to be a tube TV, the last of its kind before flat screens showed up. I remember seeing stuff like this in my uncle's antique shop before it went bankrupt. He would sell TVs like this to people who had the money to waste on collecting useless and outdated junk. Maybe they found some value in it. I don't know. I gravitated towards the TV and decided to play with it. I couldn't find a remote for it, but the buttons on the front of it seemed to work. I turned the TV on and ended up having to tweak it a bit to get it to work. It seemed like a bunch of channels didn't work until I started scrolling up past 100 channels. From there I was able to see the fuzz that the TV was producing start to fade away and the noise alter as the picture took shape and revealed old shows that I used to watch when I was a kid. Old sitcoms played for a while and filled the otherwise empty house with a little bit of comfort as the walls reverberated with the conversations of actors older than the roles that they played, making cheesy jokes and skits over canned laughing tracks. As cringeworthy as that might be, it made me feel a lot more at ease to hear that going on, to just watch the TV for a little while before I went around the house and tried to settle in. I decided to look for a mattress to bring into the main living room so that I could be able to see who was coming and leave at a moment's notice if need be. I went to one of the smaller rooms and pulled out a decent-sized mattress to bring into the living room. I didn't think that I would be there long, but I didn't expect my stay to be very short either. I continued to watch the TV for a bit as I tried to unwind so I could fall asleep. As my eyes began to close, I noticed something weird take shape. I was watching the sitcom and chuckled a little bit at a joke as my eyes began to close when something jolted me awake. I heard a harsh static coming from the TV and saw that it turned to static. I got up and went to turn it off, but it stopped as the TV turned itself off right as I reached the power button. I thought to myself, how weird was that? But eventually played it off as just a power outage and decided to head to sleep. All things considered, I slept great the first night and would only sleep relatively well that night. The next day, I went back into the city to try and get enough food for the day. To my surprise, people were more generous today on their way to work. I managed to get enough money to buy some food for the next few days. My newest problem was trying to find a way to get showered up and cleaned up. I figured I could shower in one of those convenience stores that had a shower. I had enough of my own soap and everything this time, so I didn't have to shoplift. That was a relief that made the shower feel all that more rewarding. I decided to go and wash my clothes in a nearby laundromat since I had enough left over to afford that. I would rather be clean and look clean enough to try and see if there was any way I could find work and finally get off the streets. I got a weird look from a couple of ladies when I came in with my bag and pack of detergent. I tried my best to ignore them, as I usually ignore people who give me weird looks when I enter places. I was on a mission, and I wasn't going to let these people deter me from getting my stuff clean before I went back to the streets. After my clothes were clean, I decided to head out along the main stretch of the city to look for places that I could apply for a job. After finding a decent restaurant with a laid-back but upscale atmosphere and a help wanted sign on the restaurant window, I decided to head on in and see if I could apply. After a bit of chatter, I managed to get an application out of the manager and filled it out. They tried to tell me that they would give me a call back if they were interested, but I had to explain how I didn't have a phone and I was on my own without letting them know that I was homeless. To my surprise, they sat me down and read through my application and decided to perform an impromptu interview. After a few questions, I managed to get confirmed for a job as a waiter there and felt a sense of thrill wash over me. I left that restaurant after giving my many thanks and made my way back to the mansion. I was so excited to start my new job the next day. My plan was to build up as much cash as I could while I stayed there to get my own place, a phone, a car, and everything else that I needed to finally be on the right track with my life towards something I could be proud of. If only things were ever as much as a walk in the park as that interview. I made my way back to the house and realized the TV was on. I started to panic and went to turn it off and started to search around the house. I pulled out my flashlight from my pack and started to make my way down all of the halls to investigate. My concern was that someone else had found out that someone broke into the house and was lurking around the estate. I made my way slowly and quietly down the halls, flashing my light into each of the rooms and peering around each corner. Each one of the rooms was covered in dust and were left either barren or had random furniture in them, so there weren't too many places whoever got in here could hide. I made my way to the back of the house and jumped when I heard something massive slam on the floor. My mind was racing now with what it could possibly be. A person, a beast, something worse. I wasn't sure. What could be at the end of this hallway? But I was running out of possibilities real fast. I turned the corner of the last section of the hallway on the 3rd floor and flashed my light towards the end. In a corner, 2 eyes reflected light back at me. I took a sigh of relief and realized the thing looking back at me was a raccoon. I flashed the light at it and it ran towards a window and hopped out. It was one of the most bizarre things that have happened to me in a long time. I decided to head over to the ledge and flash my light down into the snow and saw that it had run off somewhere away from the house. With the raccoon gone, I felt calm enough to return to the mattress and try to get some rest. I could hear a low hum that night that kept waking me up. but it wasn't the worst thing I had to sleep through. The next day I went to work and managed to build up a nice amount of tips while I waited on a couple of dozen tables. It was a lot of work, but I managed to build up a reputation as a good waiter and collected just over $200. It was good enough for me to start considering where I could start looking to stay. It made me think about trying to get my life together, you know? This restaurant was upscale and had its own uniform set up, but seeing as how they provided me with everything that I needed, I would just need to keep it clean and I'd be set. I decided that I would only stay in the mansion for the rest of the week and work on building up my cash. My impulses were getting the best of me though. I went to one of my local dealers and decided to pay for a couple of tabs of acid to be able to celebrate. He cut me a good deal and sold me 2 tabs for $15, and I went on my way to grab some food and make my way back out to the mansion. That night was a lot of fun. Having turned on the TV right before I took one of the tabs, I started to have a ton of fun hallucinations take shape and felt more at peace with myself, which helped me fall asleep so I could be rested and ready for work again. I slept through most of the night but was jolted awake by the sound of things slamming in the house. I decided to look around again but couldn't find anything in the rooms like before. I made my way to the top of the house and looked down the hallway with my flashlight and came across 2 eyes. I froze because of where the 2 eyes were. I saw 2 white eyes reflecting back at me from the ceiling. I waved my flashlight at it and a thing crawled away down the hall. I slowly made my way around the house looking for those same eyes again, but I couldn't find them. Whatever it was left, and I was once again alone. I couldn't really fall back asleep again, so I made my way out to work. Work was great and I brought in even more tips than yesterday, but I couldn't help but think about the thing I saw looking back at me in the mansion. It wasn't small, and only crawled on the ceiling. I saw it twist its head at me a couple of times to get a better look at me before I drove it off with the flashlight. After thinking about what it could have been, I assumed it was just the after effects of the acid tabs that I took that lingered with me after I woke up. Either way, I was thinking even harder about getting off the streets and was looking for apartments today. I found one that was housing people at just shy of $700 a month. They wanted a down payment on it, but it wasn't much. I figured that I could get the apartment payment sorted within a few more days, so I decided to work an extra hour in the night to try to earn a few more tips. It garnered me another $100 on top of the tips it earned me that night and made the apartment within my grasp. I wasn't content though. I wanted enough money to last me through that month so I wouldn't risk eviction in case something happened to my job or the tips started to dwindle. So I made my way back to the mansion again, and that night, everything started to get weird. I started to notice that there were tracks in the snow around the fence. I figured that some kids had decided to come and mess around the estate. I hope they enjoyed their exploration now because of the harsh reality of exploring and looking for a home when you have nothing is a lot less glamorous than going urban exploring. I liked the way that I felt when I took the tab of acid the night before, and despite my better judgment, I decided to take the second tab. Things were fine at first, and I decided to keep the TV off at night and just allowed my brain to roam the house. I went around the house laughing as different paintings of the family that used to live there took funny shapes. I was having a good time until I saw a large figure at the end of the hallway, looming in the corner like everything else I would shine my flashlight at did. I waved my flashlight at it, and it didn't move. It just stood there, staring. I started to back away, realizing that this figure was easily a foot taller than me. I moved my flashlight in the process, trying to make sure that I didn't fall over the furniture that the raccoon had knocked over. When I pointed my flashlight back at the corner though, the figure was gone. I decided to look around the house some more, but couldn't find that figure again. Something about this house just didn't seem right. Maybe it was the acid, maybe it wasn't. Things were making less and less sense when I came back to the living room and saw the TV was on. I didn't remember turning it on, but I was too tired after all of that to care. I turned it off and went to sleep on the mattress. I slept a little more soundly that night, but woke up extra early to a loud slam. I wanted to see if it was another raccoon, but I didn't have the time to explore before I headed off to work again. I grabbed what was important and decided to head out with everything that I needed, rather than leave it unattended and risk someone looting all of my money and supplies that I had gathered. I now realize that doing that was probably the smartest decision I have ever made. I made my way to work and managed to make even more tips that day, surprisingly having enough money left over after my shift for the apartment, a prepaid phone, a nice meal, and some more acid. I decided to skip on the acid and went ahead to reserve myself an apartment and went looking for a prepaid phone. I didn't find the one that I wanted, and I'm glad that I decided to skip on it after all. I bought a nice meal for myself and made my way to the mansion after. It was a satisfying day for me, all in all, but I couldn't help but feel like I was being followed on the way back up to the estate. As I made my way through the snow, I kept seeing shadows all around me, and I could hear crunching noises, as if someone's boots were crunching in the snow and rocks underneath them. I made my way quickly back into the mansion and tried to settle in for the night. I turned on the TV and tried to use it to relax for a bit, but that was ruined when I heard a loud screeching noise come from the TV box. I tried to turn it off, but the power button stopped working. I then tried to look for the cable to the TV and realized that it was fried and was permanently connected to the power outlet. I tried tearing it out of the wall, but that didn't work. Right as I was almost about to pull the cable out, the TV stopped making that screeching noise, and I decided to inch my way over to the front of it. What I saw made me fall back onto the mattress, and is something I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. A single large hand loomed on the screen, outstretched and open, as if trying to grasp at something. It was just hung there in the static, almost as if it was trying to reach out through the television to grab me. And that's when I heard the voice that I will not forget.
"It appears that we have a trespasser here, Master Wolf. What would you suggest that we do with him?"
The sound of an old-timey butler that you would hear in famous movies rung loud through the TV, almost like a bell when it hit me. The voice that followed got me back up on my feet and set me into a run.
"Bring them to me."
I grabbed my belongings and began to run, only looking back to see the TV had turned off, and I started to hear voices and noises surround me as I ran. Shadows of outstretched hands began to take shape in the snow as I ran away from the house. The closer I got to the gate, however, the sooner I realized that there were footsteps chasing after me. I ran faster and threw my bag over the fence as I made my way through the gap, but right as I was about to exit the estate, something grabbed my shoulder and caused me to scream as I tugged and pulled away from whatever had grabbed me. I looked back after it tore part of my shirt off and I fell into the snow. What I saw will be imprinted into my brain for the rest of my life. I looked back and saw the image of a baby on the top of the fence with white eyes and sharpened teeth, and right below it was a man surrounded in shadows, like the baby above it, with glowing eyes and pointed white teeth. I grabbed my pack and didn't look back at the house anymore as I ran out of the neighborhood and ran back into the city. I realized when I got into town that it was a good thing that I didn't buy the phone just yet and could afford a hotel for the night, at least before I got into my new apartment before the week was done. I rested a little bit easier that night, knowing that I had left the house behind for the last time and wouldn't be going back. The next day I went to work with the figment of both of those figures imprinted into my mind and decided that regardless of whether they were real or fake, I wouldn't return back to that house ever again. Been about a week since I was last in that house, and I managed to get a prepaid phone and get into my new apartment. Work is going well, and I managed to put together the money to buy a cheap mattress and a cheap laptop so I could communicate with my family. I bought brand new white shirts and shorts so I could look somewhat clean when I did a call with them over the laptop to let them know that I was still alive and doing okay. I told them the story of my time at Wolf Mansion on Wolf Ridge Drive, but none of them believed me. All they had to say was, lay off the acid. As much as I wanted to say that they had a point, I don't think that everything was hallucinated. I still can't explain everything that I saw there, but one thing is for certain. I won't go back to the last house on Wolf Ridge Drive. I'd just like to start off by saying, I'm a huge fan of your channel. I watch all of your videos as soon as they come out. Most nights when I'm on patrol, I even re-listen to stories I've heard more than once already. My name is Alex. I'm a 25-year-old deputy sheriff for a small county in northern Minnesota. This all took place around October of 2019. My story starts out simple enough. It hadn't been all that interesting of a night. I had started my shift at 6 p.m. I worked 12-hour shifts, so I was just settling in for another miserable night of boring work. I stopped one person for a burnt-out headlight and was called to a domestic disturbance, typical small-town police work. The domestic call was fairly easy to handle, and before I knew it, it was midnight already. I was halfway through my shift now. Now, I will fill you in on a little backstory on one of my least favorite parts of my job. There's a small town of only 60 people in our county, my hometown actually, and about 9 to 12 miles to the east is a wetland conservation area. Basically just a swamp. We just call it simply the slough. To get to it, you have to go down the sketchiest road there is. It's not even really a road, more like a half-road, half-grass trail. It's bumpy as all hell, and not maintained by the highway department more than once a year. Most people just take a pickup out there and have no problem. Anyway, it is literally out in the middle of nowhere, as far as you can get from people around here, which makes it a fairly popular destination for booze cruisers, people who just drive around drinking alcohol, and underage drinkers. I've heard stories starting as far back as the 50s about people going out there to drink. I even will admit to doing it starting when I was 16 before I got to be a deputy. Lately, my department has been cracking down hard on things like that. As they should, I guess. And sadly, I work night shift, and is closest to my hometown. It's my job to make the rounds there each night. I started down the trail and it didn't take me long to become irritated with the bumps in the trail. My squad is an Impala PPV, and everyone else in our department had SUVs or pickups by now, but I'll stop complaining. Now, about this time, I think I should mention that I do have a German Shepherd canine in the back. Her name is Chloe, and we have a very strong bond. The department got her as soon as I was hired on at 20 years old, and I raised her from a pup to form such a deep relationship with her. I guess when I think back on it, Chloe must have known something was up even before I did. It took us probably 20 minutes to get to the lot at the end, and she started whining and her ears went back the whole way. Honestly, I just thought that she had to use the bathroom or something. I kinda gave things a quick glance out of the windows of my car and thought that we were all alone out here. I decided to get out and let her use the bathroom, but she was acting strangely. She would not get out of the car. I had to pull her out, and then all it seemed like is that she wanted to go back inside the car. I've listened to hundreds of your stories, as previously mentioned, so seriously I have no idea why I didn't see this as a red flag. While I was struggling with her though, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. There is a dam in between two hills that regulates the flow of water out of the wetlands and into a state ditch where it flows to a river. And just over the lip of the hill, on my side, I noticed something catching the moonlight and glistening just enough to catch my attention. I grabbed my flashlight and Chloe's lead and began walking towards it. As I got closer, I saw that it was a black pickup truck with the passenger door hanging wide open. Upon further investigation, I found that it was hung up on top of some logs underneath it. The key was still on, and it was still in drive, but it wasn't running. The lights were also not on. However, there was something even more strange. The paint all over the truck was covered in deep long scratches from what I had immediately thought was a bear or a timber wolf. Just some kind of large predator. Even the windshield was shattered and pushed in somewhat. So I figured that some struggle had to have taken place here. It didn't take me long to realize that I needed to hit my radio to call in the only other person on duty tonight, which happened to be my coworker and friend Damien.
Hey Damien, I think I need some help out at the slough, ASAP.
I said.
Something just doesn't feel right. I've got an abandoned vehicle out here with clear signs of animal attack. You'd better try to have dispatch get a hold of DNR and get them out here too.
He radioed back almost immediately and said he'd be on his way, but he was about 30 miles out. That being out of the way, I decided to poke around just a little bit more. I had to take Chloe back to the car first and put her inside. She had been dragging her heels the whole time I had been investigating, and I knew if I wanted to get anything done, she would have to sit in the car. But on my way back past the dam, she stopped dead in her tracks and went ballistic, just barking at the darkness towards the dam. I didn't know what to think about this, so I just fought and pulled her back the rest of the 300 feet or so to my cruiser. After I got her in, she didn't stop barking though. She jumped from door to door like she was mad. This really wasn't like her. I should have just gotten back in my car and waited for Damien right then and there. My curiosity though just kept pushing me to go check out the dam. Before I left, I turned my emergency lights on so Damien could locate me easier. I walked down the hill and onto the little catwalk that crosses the dam. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary there. The gates were wide open, and the noise of the water was just deafening. The vapor filled the air. On the other side of the catwalk, there was another gate that went to another trail, but this was more like a four-wheeler or side-by-side trail that went deeper into the woods. I've never been all the way down that side of the trail, so I can't say I know much about where it goes. I made my way through the gate on the other side of the dam, walked up the hill, and I just couldn't see anything around there. This is where things start to take a turn for the worse though, and everything began to fit together for me that I was in real danger. Up until this point, I could hear Chloe carrying on barking and howling still out of the open window of my car on the other side of the dam, and the noise of all the water was still deafening. However, when I reached the top of that hill, it was almost like I passed through some sort of supernatural sound barrier. It caught me severely off guard. It was very disorienting. I shined my light around for a second confused. I turned around and I could see plain as day that the water was still flowing just as fast. But how could it not be making a sound, I thought? It was just pure silence. I turned back around to the ATV trail, shined my flashlight, and there it was. Almost like it had just teleported there while I wasn't looking. About maybe 100 feet ahead of me was this creature. It was crouched in the middle of the trail, so I couldn't quite gauge how big it was. It had to be 5 foot tall just crouching. I had never felt fear strong enough to freeze me in place my entire life until this second. All I could do was stare at it, and I'll never forget what it looked like. It had a head of a deer, with big antlers and empty black eye sockets, yet somehow the torso of the skinniest, palest man imaginable. I could see a clear human ribcage outline underneath the pale, almost plaster-colored skin. Its arms didn't look like they were much more than bones. They were longer than any normal person should be, though. But the claws were something straight out of a nightmare. They had to be 6 inches long and on both hands. I felt like I had stared at it forever, mesmerized by its shape and the faint flashing red and blue lights. When I finally felt like I could move enough for my radio, I ever so slowly inched my left hand to my right shoulder and pressed the talk button. The only words I could get out were just a quiet whimpering plea.
Damien, please God help me.
That's when this creature immediately stood up. It went from 5 foot tall crouching to easily 8 foot tall, 9 foot at most, standing up. My heart just about exploded from the amount of fear I was feeling. I let go of the radio and quickly went for my .45 Colt handgun to draw it in the direction of the creature. I just held my gun trained on it as it continued to stand in the same spot. Now, I could see that under its human torso, it had the legs of a deer to match its head. Then, I think it spoke. All it did was open its mouth, though. It didn't move its jaw around like a human would while they were trying to speak. The sound that came out of its mouth sounded almost like a recording in a very echoey room. It was a woman's voice, repeating, "Stop. No, please stop." It shut its mouth, opened it again, and repeated the same thing. And after that, it said, "Please, I don't want to die." In that same voice before letting out a sound as I had never heard before. It sounded like a woman screaming at the top of her lungs, but with some kind of demonic scream thrown on top of it. I think it was at this moment that I started hearing sounds in the woods again. At the same time as the scream, it took off running in my direction. I fired a shot or two off real quick from the casings that were found afterward, but I must have missed because I had already begun my turnaround to start running for my freaking life. I made it down that 10-foot hill in what I swear only felt like 2 strides. When I got to the gate, I tried my hardest to slam it closed without breaking my pace, but it didn't work as I had planned. I managed to slam the gate, but I managed to trip over the lip of the catwalk, falling flat on my chest, ripping my badge off my shirt where it must have fallen into the water below. I heard the creature hit the gate, but I never turned around to see if it slowed down any. I was up nearly as fast as I was down and running at full pace again. I made it across the catwalk and out of the gate on the other side. However, the hill on the side with my patrol car was a little steeper, and I remembered being down on my hands and knees trying to crawl up it as fast as I possibly could, but I wasn't quick enough. Suddenly I could feel its claws dig into the back of my ballistic vest and grab me. Gun still in hand, I pointed it down behind me and fired off 3 more rounds blindly, because it was enough for it to let me go, and I continued crawling up the hill. Before I could even think about my actions, they were happening. I was at the top of the hill, now running towards my squad. I got to it and opened the door all in one swift move and threw myself in. But I was just a second too late to close the door. I slammed it, but it wouldn't close all the way. I mean, I knew the creature was right there. I was looking dead at it, but I didn't notice in the darkness that its hand was grabbing the top of my door, preventing it from closing. Its long claws were just about down to the bottom of my window on the inside. It began to pull up with its might, but I held on for dear life. I continued to fight it by trying to pull the door inward with every ounce of strength I had. This whole time Chloe had been still sitting there going nuts in the back, barking and growling and snarling. I looked over and through the cage I saw that she had her teeth out and was foaming at the mouth, as I had never seen before. Not even when she was after hardcore criminals. I never want to see her like that ever again. The creature was getting frustrated, I think, at this point, because with its other hand it gripped my rear window bars through the open window and started to violently shake the whole car. Thinking about it now, I don't know how I was able to hold the door shut against its sheer power. Maybe I got super strength when I was fighting for my life. I don't know. But I was starting to lose my grip fast though, so I made the last-minute decision to grab my pistol I had thrown in the passenger seat. After I grabbed it, I aimed it at the creature's hand and fired 1 shot. It let out another ungodly screech. It stopped pulling, and while I had its hand trapped, I moved the pistol down, pointed it right at the creature's head through my driver's side window, and fired. The glass in my window shattered from the first shot. The creature pulled back and away from my car. I kept pulling the trigger after that shot through the window, but all I heard was clicking. I had fired all 7 shots in my .45, but I didn't waste a second of the opportunity those last 2 bullets gave me. I yanked my column shifter down into reverse and stepped on it. I swung the front end of my car towards the exit and took off down the trail faster than I ever had before. I was trying desperately to get through to Damien or dispatch on my radio, but there was nothing. I could hear nothing. All I could even get out of my mouth was,
"Help! Shots required help.
I was maybe only 4 miles down the trail, just past where it turned from the grass back to gravel, when all of a sudden something jumped out in front of my headlights. It was a woman. At least I wanted to believe it was. She was wearing a black tank top, white shorts and no shoes. She was just soaked. She had come up from the bottom of the ditch. She had cuts all over her body, which I later found out she had gotten from being tossed around in the ditch by the rapids near the dam. She had made the call to jump into the water to escape. I just barely missed hitting her. She ran through the cloud of dust to my passenger side. She begged and pleaded for me to let her in. She was hysterical that something was out here, which I knew all too well already, but this woman's voice sounded so real. It didn't have that echoey sound that the creatures did. I was just trying to take a second to think over whether I should let her in or not. But then, through my busted-out window, I could see and hear branches breaking in the forest like they were getting closer. I made the decision to unlock the door. She jumped in as soon as I hit the button, and I just stepped on it again. This time, I didn't stop for anything. When I was almost back to town, that's when I saw emergency lights headed towards me. More than one vehicle. I met Damien first, 2 state troopers behind him, and even a border patrol from 2 towns over. I still didn't stop. I wasn't stopping until I got to town. They all turned around and followed me back to town 100 miles per hour the whole way. That's basically where the story ended for that night. We were both so traumatized. We were sent to the hospital to be checked over, and Damien took Chloe for the rest of the night. I'd never met the woman before, but it turns out she was just out there like I had figured, to have a few drinks in this cool spot her friends had told her about. When the creature surrounded her truck, she tried to take off in reverse, but was in drive instead, and that's how she drove off the hill and got all hung up. She then ran off out of the passenger door to escape into the ditch. I say creature in quotations because really, as far as the report goes, I couldn't say that I was attacked by a deer person, skinwalker, or whatever that was. So we both to go with unknown wild animal. Besides, all the investigation at the scene only ever really turned up deer tracks and broken glass.
My name is Bill Reynolds. Together with my friends Sarah, Jacob, and Lily, I'm going to be exploring a supposed legend around these woods. They say there's another side to the woods of Northern California. Supposedly several people have simply vanished. Part of our aim is to find out where they went and why. There is more to it, though. The woods around here are rumored to hide something. A place that steals souls. A possible gateway to hell is rumored to be here. I know it sounds far-fetched, but we aim to prove or disprove just that as well. Because of this, we will be recording every day. We won't be addressing the camera directly, though. Instead, we want to show what we find organically. So from this point of view, you'll see everything we see as it is happening. Is there a place that leads to hell? Does it steal soul? Come on, dude. Ignore the cameras and let's get moving. I want to hurry up and prove all this hell business is baloney and get home to my lady to record a real documentary, if you know what I mean. Dude, you really think she's gonna let you record that? There's a bit of laughter from our group as we head deeper in the woods. Everyone's pretty jovial at the moment, and I have to admit, even if we find proof of nothing, it is nice to get away with my closest friends and have this time together. Jacob and I have known each other since kindergarten, while Sarah and I have known each other since we were in diapers. Lily came along about middle school, but we all warmed up to her pretty quickly. I haven't told the rest of the group this, but I'm kind of hoping we do find proof of what happened. It'll be a great jump start for my journalism career. We're all in college still, but, I mean, you can never get a great start in your career too soon, right? I look over to see Sarah walking next to me now. I've always had a thing for her. I've never said anything, and it's totally cliché, but it is what it is. I'm glad she's with me on this trip. I look up as we continue forward and realize we're surrounded by nothing but trees now. There are no clearings, and there's barely a path as we press onwards. It looks like it might rain, but all our gear is waterproof, and we brought raincoats for just this occasion. One of the things about the legend I'm seeking to prove real is that supposedly, in the rain at night, there is supposed to be a place unseen to anyone. It's rumored that the missing people are lost there. There's no real word on whether this place is a village, a building, or what it's like, really. That being said, I know the area of the disappearances is all in the same location, so that's where we're headed now. I figure, if there's any truth to it, we'll find the proof. If not, we can go home having disproved it, and I can spend the rest of the trip with Sarah, and maybe grow the balls to finally ask her out. Win-win, right? The sun is slowly fading behind the increasingly dark clouds. It's not dark just yet, but as it begins to rain, we hear something. It isn't distinct, but there's a low humming growing around us. I pan around and notice Jack and Lily looking perplexed, while Sarah, to my shock, grabs my arm and holds me close. She claims she's cold, not scared, and I chuckled as we continue forwards. A few hours pass, and the sun is beginning to set in the distance. We've been following the humming through the rain, and the further we get, the louder it grows. The humming is now quite audible, and as we follow it, something almost transparent begins coming into focus. I can hear Jacob ask if anyone else is seeing what he's seeing, when we all agree. Before us, a large building appears to be growing more visible. At first it looks transparent, but the closer we get, the further the sun sets and the stronger the rain becomes, the more visible this monstrosity of a building becomes. This is perfect. I look on as everyone else seems a bit more apprehensive. In our free time, we do urban exploration. To find a building this huge in the middle of the woods was pretty crazy, but looking around, it doesn't seem like anyone still occupies it. No one visibly, anyway. I took my camera and continued looking around when Jacob shouts to look to the third floor of the building. He asked if we see what he's seeing. I don't see anything, and the others appear just as lost and confused when he starts shouting. There's no way we don't see her. Who? I asked. He tells me there's a woman in the third-story window. She looks like she's in her 30s, has a nurse's gown, and seems to be staring at him. He claims she's smiling, but as I look up, I can see nothing. Let's see if we can't get in, guys. If nothing comes of this, at least we can get some sick footage for our Urbex website. Sarah and Lily seem to like the idea, and Jacob appears to be a bit more apprehensive, and asks again if we're sure we don't see her. I assure him he's just feeling spooked, because it's cold, rainy, and dark out. We turn on our flashlights and begin looking for a way inside, but as we start to look, we hear a loud click. Freezing, we slowly pan around. To our surprise, it looks as though the doors to the building are opening. No way, I think to myself. That's sick. Jacob keeps staring at me, unsure of what to think as I rush up and walk towards the doors. Slowly, I walk in and peek around. There's a reception desk, and what appears to be several suitcases, and the place looks old. It also looks run down and abandoned. I turn around and signal it's safe to enter, and soon Jacob, Lily, and Sarah all join me. Their apprehension seems to fade now as they look around the building. You can feel the excitement in the air as we begin investigating. A loud, thunderous boom erupts from outside as the rain grows heavier. This place looks like a hospital of some kind. Looking closer, I brush off some dust and dirt off a sign, which reads, "The Gateway Asylum." It is only now I begin to realize that the humming has faded, when the music suddenly begins to play over the speaker. Hello? I receive only the sounds of classical music in response, as we all huddle together. Eventually, we decided it'd be best to look further inside, and we start moving from the reception desk down a long hallway into what looks like a common area. There are dust-ridden benches and chairs, but everything is empty. It's as though no one has been here in years. That brings up another thought to my mind. There's no record of this place in existence. At least, there is none that I'm aware of. When we first found the place, I thought maybe it just seemed transparent, as the rain was heavy and a fog was forming. But then, another thought entered my mind. Could this place be what we're looking for? Is this where the disappearances happened? I had barely a minute to think on it, when a dust-covered white ball bounced in our direction and reached my feet. There was a low giggle as I picked the ball up and looked it over. There was a name on it. Emily. As I turned it over and dropped it upon finding a blood-smeared handprint on the other side of the ball. To my shock, the ball bounced and rolled its way into the shadow before disappearing completely. A low giggling rang out one last time before the sound of classical music was all that could be heard. Sarah stood close to me, and as I looked around, Lily and Jacob's face told me that they definitely saw that too. I tried asking what everyone thought that was. However, no one really had an answer. Jacob asked if we should keep exploring the place, to which I nodded. If you're uncomfortable, feel free to leave. I'm not judging you, I promise. Jacob shook his head and told me that it's okay. He'd stick around for now, while Lily looked at Sarah nervously. Sarah said she'd stay, but Lily seemed unsure. She told us she wanted to leave, at which point Sarah offered to walk her back outside. There was a loud slamming sound from behind us as the music suddenly fell silent. We all glanced at one another before rushing back to the main entrance. The doors were shut now. I tried to push them, but they wouldn't budge. Suddenly, the speakers kicked on again, and a warped version of the classical music looped while a woman's voice spoke. I saw them. I witnessed it all. I watched as they ran around lost. I hear them at night. Their prayers for life. I witnessed their ends. In varying degrees of depravity. No one will ever know they were here. It is here they will spend their tormented eternity. The voice fell silent as the warped music stopped looping and returned to a normal sound. There was an audible echo of a dark laughter that filled the halls as we all rushed back to the common area. To our horror, we could see people now. They looked like ghosts, yet they made no sound. Some were beating their heads against the walls, others were clawing at their faces. A woman was twirling in a dance, her smile depraved as her hands appeared to bleed. This lasted for a few more seconds before the decay of the walls and building soon faded. The building seemed to restore itself before our eyes. The dust, the decay, all faded around us as the ghosts disappeared as well. A set of doors opened at the end of the common hall, and a woman appeared in a white nurse's gown. She smiled as she motioned us forward, but she did not say a word. Jacob shouted, "That's her," as we walked forwards. I couldn't look away from the unnerving smile she gave as we walked through the doors into another long hallway. The silent nurse shut the doors behind us, locking them before fading and appearing ahead of us. I held my camera up to record everything as we hesitantly followed behind the woman. She'd fade and get further ahead every time we got close to her, until she unlocked an elevator and the doors opened. Appearing inside, she smiled. There was something wrong with her smile as she waved goodbye, and the elevator doors shut. It was 5 minutes before the doors reopened, with no one inside. Afraid, I walked towards the doors and stepped inside. I could hear the pulsing of a heartbeat coming from the inside of the elevator as I stepped in and turned around. A compartment on the door opened, and a button appeared that read 2. "Are you guys coming?" Lily shook her head no, but Jacob came with me, and Sarah talked to Lily for a moment before stepping into the elevator and motioning for her to come on. Lily shook her head no still. Sarah was about to step out of the elevator doors when suddenly the doors slammed shut and the elevator ascended. I could hear Lily screaming at first, but that soon faded as we got higher up. The doors soon opened and we stepped out. We were on the second level of the same room, and gazing downward, we couldn't see Lily anywhere. "Lily? Lily!" There was no word or sound. It was as if she just vanished in the short time it took for us to get to the second floor of the building. We need to go back, I thought to myself, but as I turned to use the elevator again, there was no elevator. There was only a solid wall where the elevator used to be. Sarah, Jacob, and I started feeling the wall for some kind of hidden door. There was nothing there. It was just a solid wall, and the only way to go was forward. We shouted Lily's name several more times, but all we heard was the music. It was as though she'd never even been with us. Having no other way to go, we proceeded forwards and into the next part of the hall before entering through a set of swinging double doors, soon appearing in what looked like an operating room. There was no one inside, just a black outline of a body burned into a table. The place was strange, but there was nothing in the room otherwise, so we went back through the double doors, only to find we were in a different room from what we first entered. It was a hallway of cell doors. In them were the sounds of beatings and screams, but as I peered through several doors, no one was seen. I would occasionally see a shadow, outlining what I could only imagine happened in the past, but nothing corporeal was visible at all. As we go further down the hallway, however, I heard a slamming sound, only to turn and see the door we entered was gone, and the sound of screams rang out all at once. I tried running forward, but as I did, I saw hands reaching from the ground, and the walls and the ceiling above us. Jacob screamed as he was slowly held in place, and the sound of tolling was heard in the distance. I turned back to get him. However, as I did, he began being pulled. His screams soon stifled as the hands reached over his mouth before lights came on, flickering until they burst. In the darkness, I felt something grab my arm, and I jumped back, but realized quickly it was only Sarah. I could hear Jacob's muffled screams for only a moment. These were quickly drowned out by the screams of voices all around, before everything fell completely silent, and the music picked up again. The lights were somehow back again as they came to life. The music made it seem like everything was normal, and I couldn't help feeling sick at the irony of the music, in contrast with our current situation. Sarah was freaking out, and so was I. We just entered this place, and we were already down 2 of our best friends. I felt responsible, but tried to shut out the internal dialogue that berated my mind. Slowly, Sarah and I walked forward until we reached a door at the end of the hall. Opening it, we found a stairwell. The stairs didn't seem to fit the place. They spiraled upwards, and on the wall was dried blood and arranged symbols, as well as scribblings. There was one, however, that caught my attention and was actually legible. It read as follows: "You must first seek heaven if you ever wish entry to hell." I recorded this before turning to Sarah at a loss. Who would want to go to hell? The moment the words left my mouth, I felt stupid. I was the one who convinced everyone to check this legend out. Sarah must have read my mind as she reached out and shook her head. "It's not your fault," she said. Right, I thought quietly, before proceeding upstairs. As we walked up the stairs, we could hear the rain pouring outside. Eventually, we reached the top and opened the door to find a room with a piano, lots of floor space, and a long mirror that covered the far wall. There was no light, save for our flashlights and the occasional lighting that came through the windows. I could not hear thunder nor rain. Panning around, I saw a sign that read, "The Quiet Room." It was only now that I realized I didn't hear any rain or music. Yet, looking outside, you could clearly see rain pouring heavily. I turned to say something to Sarah, only to realize no sound was coming out of my mouth. I tried shouting Sarah's name, yet there was still no sound. A moment later, Sarah pointed behind me, trying to scream. Turning quickly, I saw, in the center of the room, the nurse again. She smiled gleefully now, but as she did, her teeth began to fall out of her mouth, replacing them with razor-sharp sets of teeth, oozing some black, bloody-looking fluid. The nurse turned her head to the side slowly and held her arms outwards. Behind me, the mirror seemed to suddenly spawn figures that were completely enshrouded in shadows, except for their teeth. The nurse vanished before appearing behind us, at the piano in the corner of the room. As she pressed the keys, no sound came out, but the figures in the mirror started walking forwards. They convulsed and teleported closer to the mirror, their teeth smiling menacingly. Soon, they were pressing up against the mirror, their shadowy bodies slowly passing through as the nurse continued to play her silent melody. Looking around, I found a chair and grabbed it quickly, throwing it at the mirror. The mirror cracked, and the sound of screams could be heard. As the bodies of the shadows convulsed, for a second, I heard the mad melody of the nurse pianist. The sound was beyond words. It was like madness put to a song, but instead of that song being tuned to the melody of a piano, the sound was instead an unhinged mix of screams and laughter, somehow played in the tune of beautiful madness. I didn't want to wait around to see what would happen next, so I quickly grabbed Sarah and bolted towards the mirror. As we ran, the tune grew faster and more maddening, and the shadows all turned in unison, before smiling and giving chase. I could feel the hot, almost searing breath of the shadows upon my neck when I threw myself into the mirror. I expected for the mirror to shatter. I thought I'd be cut up or impaled, but instead, the mirror absorbed me. I passed through it, as one might pass through water. A second later, I felt a tugging, and then I lost grip of Sarah's hand. I spun around slowly, and to my horror, I saw Sarah crying, enveloped by the smiling shadows. The nurse smiled in front of them. The nurse waved goodbye as I reached out, trying to scream. I couldn't, though, as I was suddenly dragged by some invisible force into the darkness, until I fell into an elevator, and the sound returned after me. The doors began closing, and I saw Sarah's terrified eyes, and the mirror faded to darkness, and the doors to the elevator shut completely. I tried to pound on them, but they wouldn't budge. The elevator began going up as the classical music began to play again, over the radio's speakers. I'd done this. I'd lost everyone because of my stupid curiosity. I had no idea if Lily, Jacob, or Sarah were even alive now. I was the only one left. The elevator soon stopped, and as it opened, I found myself in a sanctuary. In the center of an altar stood a cross. On the wall behind it was a message. She is a sacrifice unto the gods. She is the way to heaven. Her soul will get you one step closer to hell. The cross in front of me slowly moved down to the side, and from the depths of the altar came another cross, all black, upside down, and on it was a woman, crucified. She was gagged, and her eyes were covered by a set of hands that seemed to come out of the cross itself. I stepped closer, and as I shined my flashlight, I soon realized it was Lily. Lily. Oh my God, Lily. I'm gonna get you out of here. No sooner had I spoken the words did I notice the hands move to reveal Lily no longer had eyes. The hands covered her eyes once again, and I heard her screams through the gag as the floor suddenly began to move upwards. Looking up, I heard a growling, and to my dismay, I noticed two large sets of teeth appear from the ceiling itself. I quickly ran towards the upside-down cross and tried moving it, kicking it, and all matters of things to break it or free Lily. But nothing worked. Panicked, I tried harder to free her, but it was no use. Behind Lily, on the wall, I saw another message. Hell is the only way home. Looking up again, I noticed the mouth had grown bigger, until there was an eyeless face sniffing and snapping at the air. The sound of Lily's cries now echoed as the floor continued its ascent towards the mouth of the creature above. There was a growling, and then a sudden snap. The platform stopped, and there was an audible crunch of bone and chewing. A geyser of blood flew out of Lily's top half and her mouth as she died. She'd been bitten in half, and slowly the platform moved upwards, the monster slowly eating Lily piece by piece as it did, until the monster faded and the ceiling opened up. It was at the top of the platform, stopped, and a door waited before me. I sat on my knees, crying as I rewound the footage and watched it all again. There was nothing I could do, I thought to myself. It was all there on the camera. It all happened. I stood up slowly and tried to step towards the door. On the side was a sign that read, Reflection. Opening the door, I entered the room. Inside was a long hallway. On it was crucified versions of the shadows from the mirror room. These shadows convulsed now, all forming the shape of Lily. The torment and suffering she endured, leading to her death, were mimicked on a loop as I continued forwards. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. The insanity before me couldn't be real, I kept thinking to myself, but it obviously was. As I approached another door, I reached out to open it, when everything went dark, and I reappeared. The same shadows, the same versions of Lily, now screaming in tortured agony. The door was once again at the end of the hall. I ran through the screams, and I reached the door before it repeated. I tried it one last time, and again. I wound up at the beginning of the hall. I was losing my mind. And Lily's screams continued. She blamed me. She cried in pain. She asked me to save her, It happened again and again. I couldn't stand the sound of pain anymore. I turned around and tried to leave the way I came, when things fell dark, and I faced the opposite end of the hall with the door now opened before me. I reached out one last time, praying this would end when the door clicked and opened. The next room was empty, save for a lit-up wall with photos on it. A man sat on his knees, his head covered with a burlap sack, in a position of prayer. Examining the next photo, I saw a figure in the back, a black hood, a scythe in hand. Examining another photograph, I see the man still in prayer, but now in a grave. The photo after shows blood pouring within, and then, to my shock, I could hear the screams resonating in the room around me. I instantly recognized the screams as Jacob's. Touching the photo wall, I feel reality shift until I find myself at the grave. It reads, "Here lay the second key, praying in agony. Death took 3. Now his soul rests forevermore." No, this can't be. I heard the sound of a key unlocking a door. From the shadows, an elevator appeared before me. Reality shifts again, and I feel myself inside it now. The door is shut, and the elevator continues upwards once again. I stand in silence and despair. I'm unable to save my friends. This place, I can only watch all I love die in pain. What is the point? Is this elevator simply going to lead me to Sarah's death next? I'm not sure I could bear that. No sooner did the thought cross my mind did the elevator come to a stop. The doors opened, and I stepped out. The moment my feet touched the ground, I hear a snapping sound behind me. The elevator plummets, and a woman screams from within as the classical music soon after plays again. I didn't hear a crash. There was never the sound of the elevator ever hitting the ground. Inside the room I'm now in, there are 2 bodies pinned to a wall. One is a male, and the other is female. Their arms are crossed, and their mouths are sewn shut. The male is on the left, and the female on the right, facing one another, eyes shut. I'm not sure if they're really people or very realistic statues. Looking ahead, I can see a giant clock, ticking slowly away. Between the sounds of the ticking on the clock, I could hear a low breathing and the sound of a heartbeat. A desk stands before the clock, and soon the nurse appears behind that. There is something off about her, though. She still has that disturbing smile. However, she appears frozen in time. The nurse's right arm points up with an eye symbol in its center, while her left arm points down with a fire tattooed on the back of her hand. Slowly, I reach out, and to my shock, I can touch her. She doesn't look corporeal, but she is movable. There is a note on the desk in front of the woman that reads as follows. I saw fire. It slowly rose, consuming me, and all I know, once it reached its peak, I drowned in flames, eternally. Examining the nurse, I grabbed her left hand and pulled it up, and a screaming rang out, followed by a silhouette behind the clock lowering. The figure appeared tied to a cross, and from below, the shadow of a fire rose. The silhouette made it impossible to tell who was on the other side, but I had a sick feeling that it was Sarah on the other side. I pushed the nurse's left hand back down, and the flames lowered again. The cross from before remained stationary, though. I could hear muffled crying from behind the clock's glass as I stopped and reread the note again. I tried moving the nurse's right arm down, but it simply lowered the cross, and the screams grew louder. Resetting the nurse's right arm, the cross reset in place. I thought about that poem again. The fire slowly rose, which made me wonder if there was another way to move the arms. Looking at the left arm, instead of pushing it straight up, I moved it to the side. The fire slowly rose as I did this, and I did the same with the right arm, until both arms were stretched in opposite directions. I heard the sound of shifting as the cross moved in the direction of the flames. There was screaming for a moment, and then the cross froze in place. A few moments later, it went up again. The hands on the clock moved to midnight. The door opened inside. It was another elevator. The doors opened slowly. The desk before me moved into the ground. The nurse smiled gleefully before fading out of sight. There was now only the sound of a heartbeat and breathing. There was no longer music as I walked towards the elevator doors. Stepping inside the elevator, the door shut, and soon after, it moved upwards. I could hear a heavier breathing and a groaning as a heartbeat grew louder through the walls of the elevator. Seconds later, the elevator stopped, and the moment it did, all sound ceased. As the doors opened, I saw Sarah in the center of a cross, her arms and legs fastened to a cross by barbed wire. She was blindfolded and terrified. I could see the tears rolling down her face. Sarah! The sound of her name seemed to snap her to. Above her was a plaque that read, Home. Below, the word home was an arrow that pointed downwards. There appeared to be a lever next to the cross, with the nurse now standing, hand over it, smiling. Putting a finger to her lips, she motioned her left hand towards Sarah, whose blindfold soon fell away. Struggling to move, Sarah cried and begged for me to get her out. I was about to reassure her when I saw the nurse put her hands together in a prayer formation. Then she grabbed the lever with her right hand and pointed down with her left, before pulling the lever. The floor opened up, and millions of arms reached from flames as Sarah's cross was slowly grabbed and dragged downwards. I tried to reach her, but I couldn't move. The harder I struggled, the less I was able to. All I could do was watch as Sarah screamed for her life. I wanted to look away, but I was unable to shut my eyes. Sarah kept eye contact with me the entire time, right up until her final screams rang out, and the floor sealed again. The force that had hold of me suddenly let go, and I was left in a room, alone. The nurse had faded, and all I heard was the sound of rain. I felt cold and afraid. Was Sarah dead? What in the hell did I just witness? Watching the woman I secretly loved slowly drug into a fiery abyss. I felt myself dying inside, bit by bit. I felt lost, and I wasn't sure of the answers to my problems. Were there any? Looking behind me, I noticed there were no longer any elevators. No elevator, where previously there was one. No other doors showing a way out. There was a window, and as I looked outwards, all I saw was rain. I appeared to be at the top, with nowhere else to go. I pounded on the window in anger. It didn't even crack. Closing my eyes and falling to my knees, I once again heard Sarah's screams. Then, I worked my way back mentally. It was then I remembered the words I'd seen on my way up. I pulled out my camera and began to rewind. I reviewed my footage, and soon I pieced together what I believe I was being told. It wasn't possible, though, right? You must first seek heaven if you ever wish entry to hell. Hell is the only way home. The name when we first entered this place. The place was called the Gateway Asylum. The legend spoke of a gateway to hell. Looking around the room, my flashlight in hand, I soon came upon a sign above me. It read, Heaven. Was this the room I was in? I recalled only rooms like Reflection. In that, I had to head the opposite way to break the loop I was in. If I were to take the writings literally, then the only way out from here was down. Wait a second. That's just crazy. I'm not seriously considering there's a way to hell from here, right? And nothing else makes sense in this place. The existence of this place doesn't even seem plausible. Yet here I am. No sooner had the thought crossed my mind on what to do next, did I suddenly feel a shifting from beneath my feet. Backing up, I watched as part of the floor opened up. From the depths, I heard a heavy breathing. It was the deepest and most terrifyingly menacing breathing I'd ever heard in my life. An elevator soon rose from the depths and stopped in the center of the room. The elevator was all black, and across the center of its doors, in red, it said, Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. A gold plaque at the top read, Hell. I couldn't believe this. It didn't seem real. The doors slowly opened, and as they did, I could hear loud screaming. Seeing no other way out, and silently praying Sarah might still be okay, I stepped inside. Turning around, I saw the nurse there, smiling outside the doors. The doors slowly shut, and the screams fell silent. The elevator began its descent. I felt my body shaking. I felt my fear rising. I closed my eyes, said a final prayer, and hoped I'd somehow find my way home. Alive. The further the elevator descended, the more piercing the sounds of the screams are. I feel my body tensing up. I feel a nauseating sickness overwhelm me. The screams continue to grow. My mind is overcome by things I don't quite understand. I can see things that are indescribable, and I feel the horrors of the madness I'm witnessing sinking ever deeper. The sharp claws of my ever-dwindling sanity are now tearing my mind apart internally. I'm not sure any of my equipment is working anymore. Farther, I descend as the screams grow louder, and soon I'm unable to discern if those screams are right outside the elevator, or they're coming from my mind. Could it be both? No sooner do I question these things, do I feel the elevator stop. There's a moment I'm sure it has stopped, before I suddenly snap to, and realize it is still descending. I'm not sure if that's real, however, as I see both possibilities, feeling their sensations and outcomes all at once. It is as though I stand in two realities, playing at their core all at once. This, mixed with everything else, has overcome me, to the point I feel my mind and body slowly tearing into two. I can't take it. Make it stop. What am I seeing? Are those screams real? No. No. There is a flash of pain and for a second, one half of the splitting mind, one half of the dueling realities, goes black. I'm shocked to have found myself awoken, but I'm sure I didn't ever sleep, right? I'm shaking, sweating, and the elevator has well and truly stopped. I feel a sense of impending dread, and an innate curiosity grab me as I pull my hands towards the elevator doors. I expect a searing heat, but I feel an icy cold as I touch the doors. The doors suddenly come to life, and as they open, they grate, and within the grating, I hear their screams. I know it is the dead, though. I have no real knowledge of how. I feel within their screams a flickering of doubt as I step outside. Before me appears to be a cliff that is a single, lone bridge. As I step toward the bridge, I sense something below. Looking downward, I see nothing but a black abyss. I can sense something, though. Something that even slightly dwelling on sends the coldest of shivers upon my spine. I make a near equal horrific realization as I look at the bridge. The bridge appears to be made of mangled limbs and flesh of humans. Seeing no other way out, I hesitantly step on the bridge. I'm taken aback in shock as I hear screaming from below my feet. An eye looks out, and through the piece has no mouth. I hear his screams echoing inside my mind. He cries of the pain he feels, the agony that knows no end, and of the suffering of my foot upon him. Terrified, I begin to run, and as I do, there are more screams, more souls in unending pain. They beg for my help, but what can I do? I feel their despair, and just the feeling drops me to my knees in both sympathy and ever-growing hopelessness as well. I pick myself up and rush across the bridge once again. The bridge stretches far, and I keep feeling flashes of something almost swimming in the dark abyss below. That's when my next step goes through the flesh below my feet. I rapidly attempt to pull my leg from out of the flesh, and as I pull my leg free, I look through the hole I have left. I feel something growing. The fear knows no bounds. A fear that makes me wish to throw myself into the pit below. I see myself for a moment, cackling like a madman, throwing myself from the bridge. It's too much. It's too much. I cry. I hear the screams grow louder, and then I see the red eyes. It is then I'm overcome with a searing headache, and I snap back too. Looking down, I'm terrified, as the other me descends with a smile, soon vanishing into the darkness below. A part of me feels dead inside, as I recover my faculties, and rush forth once again. I wish not to dwell a second longer, as I soon make it to the other side in haste. A black gate stands before me. It soon opens, and as it does, I can hear it speak my name. I walk ever so hesitantly inside. As the gates close again, I feel my body, or maybe it's my soul, shifting forward. There stands a house before me. Its doors are open, and as I step through its entrance, I see a long hall. A hall that appears never-ending. I see other people, or souls. They are pleading above. They are crying to someone who gives no obvious response. A woman with no eyes cries of her sight. She speaks of overwhelming dread. She claims she knows where it is. She now makes her bed. She begs forgiveness for the thing that led to her end. She asks for a second chance to free herself of her sins. There is no reply. Another man grabs me by the arm and begs me for a way out. He screams at me, pleading for an exit. I've been here for no longer than I know, he says. He tells me there is no longer a start. There is never an end. Instead, he just stands here. According to the man, no one ever responds, and that silence is partially what is so maddening. The man is old and describes the feeling as though praying to a god who does not care, or who simply cannot hear. The man slowly lets go of me, and he cries. As he walks away, I can hear him say, "There is never an end. Why is there never an end? Am I to await an answer for eternity? Still, no matter how long I'm here, there's also that sense and dread. Will I be given a second chance, or is it the fire that is to be my end?" I feel an uneasiness as I try to shake off those words. I don't know if it's how he said it, or what he said, but I feel what is spoken in my core. I continue forward and look around at all the people praying, crying, and sometimes doing both. I see the hopelessness they feel in their eyes, but it is also a palpable feeling. I continue to walk, and walk, and walk. The hall appears to have no end. Random fragments of my own past begin to overtake my mind. It's odd, and they are from random dates and times, and some of them are the most menial of things. Kicking dirt on a kid, stealing a cookie from a jar, things like that. Then, I'm overwhelmed with a feeling of regret. I see Sarah's face. I remember the things I feel, as well as what I felt in the past. My silence overtakes me, and I stop walking. That silence, never speaking how I felt to her. It is like water, drowning me suddenly. I feel myself gasping for air, as I also see myself on my knees, clawing into my skull, screaming to someone who seems to not be there. It's the weight of my silence that makes me drown. I'm sinking into a black abyss, feeling myself losing my breath. The thoughts are clearer than ever, despite feeling as though I'm dying. They are the thoughts of despair. This despair over the tiny regrets of my life was confusing at first, and saddening, but manageable. Now, however, my silence, my ultimate regret. Never speaking the secret love that I held for my life. Never telling Sarah how I felt. Dragging her and my friends to this place. I now feel myself drowning in the sorrow of my regrets. Then, as I watch myself dying, there is a claw that refuses to let go. I feel the water of tears and past regret lowering on the brink of what I believe will be my death. I'm revived again. I look at my arms, legs, and clothing. I'm soaked. Suddenly, I'm overcome with the same feeling, and it repeats again. The drowning, the despair, the suffering, the hopelessness, the near-death experience, the inability to let go. The tides subsiding, but never in finality. I gasp for air, vomiting from my body the waters of my regrets. I look up, hoping for an end in sight, when I'm put through the same endless madness, again and again and again. Every time I come back to, I cry for it to stop. I reach an arm to the sky, as I seek a way out, then watch as the waters fill around me again. The emotions cycle through once again. I think and truly believe each time that death has me. This will be the last time, I think, and as I'm sure as can be that this is true. The waters subside, and I find myself retching. I now drop my face to the floor, my hands to the ground, and cry out apologies to seemingly no one. There is this feeling that I must plead my case, and yet there is also the crushing feeling that no one is listening. I feel myself crying, begging, pleading my case, when the tears begin to stream from my face. The waters return. I'm dying again. There is no hope, and there is no end. I'm lost as it happens again. This time I'll die, I think. This time for sure. The waters recede again. As I throw up the contents of my despair, I look round at those around me. I try with all hope that is left not to look to the air. I try instead to look for a way out, looking back and forth. However, there is only the hall. The souls pleading, begging, suffering in ways that aren't visible to me, but I imagine suffering immensely. There isn't a door anymore. There is no way back. No begging, no end, only despair as the cycle begins again. I'm not sure how long the pattern has been going on. At this point, I'm not sure I care. There's hopelessness bound to being in this state. You feel regret, then drown in it. There's a faint feeling of hope, but ultimately, you are left in a tsunami of the same feelings again. In between the drowning and the overwhelming regret, I see her face. It's Sarah. I wonder if I would change things if I could go back. I'm sure I would. Such thoughts devolve, however. They become bigger questions. Could I change it? Would I even know to change it? Was I always fated into such an end? Would my friends have died or vanished away? Maybe it wouldn't have been through this insane means, but who knows? It might have been worse somehow. Though, I'm not sure how you could get worse than this. The thoughts are soon followed by the simple want to see Sarah's face again. I notice that as every near drowning, I begin to slowly see her face growing into my reality. My hopes grow every time I see her there. I begin speaking about the things I've kept silent. Little by little, each time the hope grows even more. I'm not sure if her face is actually here or if I'm delirious, but I speak my truth anyway. As I do, the near drownings begin to subside. I feel the anchor weighing down my heart and my soul begin to let go. The tides of that never-ending tsunami of despair are beginning to subside until I feel myself on my knees, cackling like a madman in glee. There is hope, and as I look above, I no longer feel compelled to beg for another chance. I feel a strange warmth and acceptance. In taking responsibility for my current state, I wish stronger than ever now to find Sarah, regardless if she lives or is dead. I must push forward and do so of my own accord. It is with that final thought that I feel a shifting in the walls of the hall. This audible shifting knocks a few of the others around me down. I look to my right and turn to see what looks like a light. There's a problem, though. As I take steps towards the light, I notice the eyes of the other souls. They grow ravenous. They no doubt see the light as well. There's a sudden urgency, like I've never felt before, as I quickly begin sprinting towards the light. All around, I watch as the others begin rushing towards the door as well. I feel myself being grabbed, clawed at, and beaten as the others try to hold me back. I break free of their grip to find them begin to turn all at once. The hall begins to repeat, as I'm quite sure I've run past many of these souls already. The further I run towards the seemingly unreachable light, the darker the faces get. Their tears are now blood, as I see their despair grow into fury. I begin to see their true faces. They're indescribably horrific. I feel a madness begin to sink in and overtake me again, as I continue to run towards the light. The door is still open and the figures stand, smiling now, twitching in place, but the light, it's no longer bright as before. It now shines a horrific crimson. No, it can't be. I think to myself, there has to be a way out. There has to be. I can hear audible salivating now from around me. The now red-tinted hall shines a terrifying gaze upon the figures who stare. Their stares of madness never-ending. I can read the looks on their faces. I must believe there is a way out. There was a start at one point, so surely there's an end. I continue to think, as I feel myself silently promising not to give up hope, to find an end, to see them twitching and watch as their fingernails grow into claws. I try to focus ahead, and that's when I see her silhouette. "Sarah," I cry, "I'm coming for you." I rush forth, and the second I take another step, I notice the twitching faces of horror around me suddenly crackle to life and begin rushing for me. I feel their nails digging into the flesh of my back as I continue to push forward. I can't give up. I can hear the crackling of bones and the contortions of bodies as I continue sprinting faster than I ever have before. I refuse to look back, as behind me is not where I wish my end to be, but still, I feel the madness stalking me. I can hear them running and clawing across the floor, walls, and even the ceiling above. I feel more scratches and even a fingernail breaking off into my flesh. The horrific sound coming from behind me is like a force of their will pushing against me as they rush to keep up. It works against me, and it's powerful, but I push onward. I feel one of them biting into my shoulder, but I smack them and never stop. The door is getting closer. Her silhouette appears more real. The insanity behind me and internally is something I try to suppress as I focus on what led to the opening of the door. The feeling of acceptance and the strength of will to wish to push forward. Suddenly, I feel the door approaching quickly. I'm just about to reach it when the silhouette is ripped into the shadows, screaming, and the crimson-red light from below fades to black. I feel myself plunge into the shadows behind the door, and the door soon slams behind me. I hear the insane screams from behind the door I've just passed through, but as I turn around, there is no longer a door. In time, those screams begin to fade, and I slowly dig out the fingernail embedded in my back. I feel a crippling pain overcome me as the nail comes out. My vision is blurry for a second, and there's a ringing that can be heard in my head before all returns to normal again. The screams soon fade, and I find myself in silent darkness. I catch my breath for a moment before I'm overtaken by a split second of despair. I'm not sure why I feel it, but it is as fleeting as the distant screams which have now faded. I regain my composure and feel around as I walk in darkness. That is when lights begin to come on. Red lights. As I look around, I notice that they are reminiscent of street lights you'd see in cities, but they appear to be made of hearts. The hearts are still beating, and as they do, the lights pulsate a bit. Walking forward, some more of the hearts begin to turn black. They bleed, some twist and contort. I'm not sure why, but I have very little time to think about it, as I notice a tall building standing before me. A neon red light springs to life. It is lips, with the words vacancy where the teeth should be. Staring at it longer makes me hear a pleasurable laughter ring through my mind. There's an aroma in the air now, and I feel my blood begin to subtly pump faster. My heart rate picks up, and I hear a door open. I look around and see no one. Everything around me is darkness. There's an unusual pull, a want to go inside, which I cannot fight. As though drawn, I walk forward, and the door gently shuts behind me. The interior of the building looks much like a seedy old motel. A woman smiles at me, exposing her well-endowed figure as she reaches over and gives me a piece of paper. With a wink and a smile, she bites her pen as she tells me to sign here to proceed forward. I feel my blood rushing at the sight of the woman, but I shake my head and resist. I struggled to keep my mind clear. The pain I had previously felt was now gone. I felt arousal and warmth. There was an unusual peace in the air, a pleasure as I stood at the counter. It was only then that I suddenly found myself opening my eyes. Looking down, I had a pen in my hand and saw my name signed upon the paper previously put before me. The receptionist smiled, telling me not to feel bad. I had to sign, and they always sign, she says. It's the only way forward, she says, with a laugh. Doubtful, I didn't have much time to think as the hall suddenly lit up before me. There was a red and pink glow as I heard the receptionist speak to me. Open your right hand, she said. Opening my hand, I saw a number on the inside. 69. I hear her tell me that's my room number. Someone was already waiting for me, she continued. With a smile, she faded, as did the counter with it. I felt a euphoria running through me as my body seemed to glide forward. I heard the pleasurable sounds of others in other rooms around me. Everyone seemed happy. Yes, happy, I thought. As the farther I went through the halls, the more I felt at peace. I soon arrived at my door. There appeared to be no lock. My hands gripped the door, which let out a pleasured moan. I jumped back for a moment, but the door opened, and suddenly I was inside. The door was no longer visible behind me. The receptionist's voice echoed inside my mind. Lay down. Her words raced through me like a toxin created to please. Have fun. The words drifted and echoed internally as I felt sleepy. I blinked, or I think I did, but it felt as though I'd slept in that time. Standing before me was Sarah. She was so beautiful. I felt the taste of her lips pressed against me and felt myself falling deeper into a trance. Yes, there would be no more problems. Just pleasure, I thought. We're finally reunited. I felt myself beginning to give in completely. I couldn't think clearly, and even less than that, when I felt her lips. I could hear the faint echoing of a voice in my head, but it was drowned out by my current feeling of contentment and happiness, that Sarah and I were finally together. Every time our lips met, I saw our future together. I saw marriage, our future children, growing old together. Everything I ever wanted or could ask for, the faint echo rang in the back of my mind again. I couldn't quite hear it, but I shrugged it off with the next kiss. The kiss was deep and intoxicating, among other things. I felt a warmth as I was transported far away from any worries and pain, just as I feel myself completely accepting the amazing truth of my future life with Sarah. I'm overcome with a searing pain in my head. I look down to see my nose is bleeding. I grip my head, but Sarah looks at me, and I feel assurance it's okay. Her kiss sends me into ecstasy until I'm hit again with a fleeting migraine that becomes more powerful. My nose begins to bleed a bit more, and I'm temporary, although hazily able to think. That's when I look up and see for a split second the horrific sight of the carcasses of other men and women. I'm feeling a warm kiss that soon turns cold. I look up to see that before me is not Sarah. No, it's a woman with scars and razor-sharp teeth. I feel that aroma again and the sound of the receptionist's voice within my mind telling me it's okay. Relax, the voice says. I feel myself lulling, and suddenly the body parts, the smell of decay and horror is gone. The woman is Sarah again, but the faint echo in my mind is now growing, as I'm not fully believing what I'm seeing. This can't be Sarah. No, it's a trick, I think. As though reacting to my thoughts, the illusion begins to fade. I look down in shock, as I realize I'm sleeping on a bed of flesh and body parts. I shove the woman on top of me, back, and crawl backwards against the bed frame, only to realize it's made of arms and legs that are sewn together. Looking ahead, I see this woman smiling, her razor-sharp teeth glistening. She looks as though she's about to feed. She looks at me as though I'm on the menu, and as I gaze at the hanging meat hooks, some with body parts, and others with the horrifically still, living bodies of others, less fortunate souls, I am snapped to reality completely. I shoot up and shove past the creature before me, who simply smiles. I hear the voice of the receptionist, but this time it goes from pleasurable sounds to distorted and twisted in sound. She asked me what's wrong, before telling me it'll be easier if I just gave in. Then there will be no pain at my initial end. This gives way to laughter as I rush out a door and into a hallway. I see the various parts of genitalia hanging from the ceiling above, as though decoration. I run through the halls, but they seem to shift. Flesh makes up carpet and floorboards, and as I push forth, I see the sight of men and women merged as one. This isn't an sensual way. No. They're screaming as they've been pieced together like some hellish experimental puzzle made of flesh and human body parts. I continue onward until I see a door made of beating hearts. I shove my way through to find myself in a room. On one side is a swing. It's normally chain rungs made of stretched and pieced together lips, which screamed as the flesh seat, covered in eyes, watched on in horror. In the center of the room was the receptionist, still looking every bit as attractive as before. I'd seen through the illusion, however, and was well aware she wasn't as she appeared. The figure pretending to be Sarah previously walked up to the woman and smiled. I saw Sarah for a faint moment, before she returned into the demon she actually was. I heard the receptionist's surly voice inside my head again, and she told me to give in. She assured me it'll be okay. I wouldn't remember the horrors I'd seen. I just needed to accept what I've always wanted. I could be with Sarah. Promise after promise she continued to give me, but I wasn't falling for it this time. No, I shouted at the woman in defiance and anger. A smile graced the woman's lips as she simply said, "Very well then." I heard screams and arms reached from the floor beneath me. A familiar madness began to overtake me as I tried to focus. I fell to one knee, my hands cupping my ears as I look ahead. The receptionist remained the same, but her counterpart still slipped in and out from Sarah's form. The world turned red around me as the two figures faded. The sounds of screams turned to moans of pleasure, which then turned to more screams. I refused to give in again and stood up, looking for a way forward. A gaping chasm opened in a wall before me. It had steps leading to a room, which were pink as I walked up to them. Moaning came from the chasm as I walked up the steps, and the door opens before me. Inside, I saw a potential future again. I saw myself on one knee, asking Sarah to marry me. I saw her happily accepting. I saw us playing with our kids. I wanted it to be real, but I knew it was a trick. It became apparent to me that in order to have any chance to get out, I needed to accept reality. The truth was, I hadn't told Sarah how I felt, and there was no guarantee if I had, this would be the result at all. It was clear this place was projecting my wants. From the pleasures in my mind to, most pressingly, the wishes I had for a future with the woman I secretly loved. It was apparent more than ever to me what was happening. This wasn't a sealed future. This was a reflection of what the heart wished, and a want of the flesh. The realization of my situation changed what I saw around me. There was shaking, much like an earthquake. The floor of flesh and body parts opened up before me, and a chasm led to a black pit. I felt 2 sets of hands reach across my body, and I heard 2 voices whisper into my ear. "You can still stay. Last chance," they said. I felt horror at the sight below me, a horror that was so terrifying that internally, part of me was screaming to stay and accept what little pleasure I'd get before dying in my current place. I'm sure staying, in a messed up way, will be the most sane option. I couldn't stay, however. I needed to push forward. Far below, I heard the gnashing of teeth and the screams of flesh being torn from bones. I was afraid, but I closed my eyes, pushed the grips of the 2 figures around me away, and fell forward. An instant dread and regret shot through me as my eyes widened to the sight of teeth. I turned and reached out, but all I saw was the smiling of the receptionist and her partner fading into the distance as the teeth snapped shut and all went black. All I could hear now was screaming.
Thanks for listening to these creepy folklore and creepypasta stories. If you enjoyed these stories, please be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to never miss a new video, as I upload them almost every single day on all things natural and supernatural. If you're not aware, you can download and bring your favorite scary stories from the swamp everywhere you go, on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, and pretty much everywhere else you listen to podcasts online. If you guys want to support the channel further outside of liking the video, leaving a comment, and subscribing, be sure to check out my merch store. I have face masks, I have mugs, I have t-shirts, I have hoodies, I have everything you could ever want. Definitely check that out if you want. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video.